Welcome back again. In the previous two tutorials we learned the basics of Docker, Docker file, Docker images and the containerization process. And we also learned how to containerize ASP.NET Core app using the Docker file and how to build and deploy our apps on Docker container. But we haven't used any database in our last two tutorials. We also didn't learn how to build and connect multiple containers. So in this tutorial we will learn how to Dockerize our ASP.NET Core Web API and SQL Server using the tool called Docker Compose. And we also learn how to connect our ASP.NET Core Web API with the SQL Server database that is running in the different Docker container. So let's start. Let's try to understand what is Docker Compose. So Docker Compose is a powerful tool used to simplify the management and deployment of multi-container application. It enables developer to define and configure all the services, networks and volume required for an application in a single XAML file. This file acts as a blueprint for managing the whole life cycle of your application and allows you to configure multiple interconnected services and their related settings also. Docker Compose greatly streamlines and collaborating among the teams and ensure consistent deployment across various environments, making it indispensable tool for containerization application development. The key functionality which include in this process are start, stop and rebuild services that we deploy, view the status of the running services, and also stream the log output of your running services, run a one-off command on a service also. As you can understand from the image, like on the Docker Compose file, we will mention our SQL Server settings and ports on which we want to host, and also the web API setting and the ports, and also the dependency on which our web API will connect to that SQL Server. Let's create a new ASP.NET Core Web API project, and for this tutorial we are using Visual Studio 2022 and using .NET 7.0. So just choose the template ASP.NET Core Web API using the C# language, click next. Here you have to give it a name to it. I am giving a Web API SQL Server Docker demo and choosing the required folder, click next. Here you have to choose based upon need. Right now we are using 7.0 and we don't want to configure HTTPS for this demo. So I am enabling a Docker because we want to use it, and also we want to use a controller. So click next. So you can see when you choose the Docker option over there, the Docker file will be added automatically on the project root. We already covered the content of this file in the previous tutorials. If you haven't watched that, please watch that first. Link is in the description. So the first thing in this tutorial that we have to do is to install the Entity Framework Core and the SQL Server data providers. So right click on the solution, go to Manage NuGet Packages, go to the Browse tab. Over there, Microsoft.SQL Server, Microsoft.Entity Framework Core.SQL Server. This is the package that we need to be installed. Just make sure if you are using .NET 7.0, then you have to use a 7 version, not the latest one, because it is not compatible with the 7.0 yet. So click on install. It will ask you to require the dependency. Click apply. I accept. It will automatically install the required packages for you. Okay, now moving towards the next package that we need, it is Microsoft.Entity Framework Core.Design. So search for it, choose it. Now again for this you have to use the 7th version, because as I told you we are using the .NET 7.0 that is compatible with this. So click on I accept. so it will also install the required files or libraries for you. And the last thing that you need to do is Microsoft.Entity Framework Code.Tools package, because since we are using the Entity Framework code first approach in this project, so click on install. It will throw an error for you because we have to choose a 7th version, because we are using 7.0 version for every libraries in this project. So click on apply, I accept. Okay, so all the required libraries being installed. Now close this NuGet tab, close this. Now create a folder over here named as models. In this model folder we will create our first class that we use into our demo, that is the product class, that we use as entity to reading operation or performing a CRUD operation to it. So save our timing, I have that class ready with me. Simply copy that, replace it, save, and it will all automatically added the required namespace that we did it. In this, it is a simple product class with the primary key ID, and that is the required fields, and these are the required column definitions that we need to be define it. Click save. Now the next step is to create a data folder into our project. So create one folder named as data. Okay, in this we are going to be create one new DB context class. To just save our timing, I have that class ready with me. So here what we will do is we will initialize all our context classes and related properties to it. So let's see what we are doing here is we have created one online, let me zoom it for you. We have created one DB context class which is inheriting the DB context, and over there, okay, so we have to use this class also. So in this what we are doing is we are creating checking the database whether it is created or not. If it is not, then we are creating it, and then we are creating their tables also. And in this demo we are only using one table, that is the products table, and we are by defaultly entering one dummy data to the table so that we can read it with when we are making a get call of the API. Pretty straightforward. Now moving toward the next step, that is, since we are using the EF core code first approach, so basically as I told you, we have to be create a database and a product table, and we want to be add some initial data that we already discussed in our last step. So now the next step is to add that connection string into our app setting.json file. So open that. So here we have to add our connection string so that it will be initialized or reading from the config file. Fine. So I am using this one. This is my database name, and I am using the open connection direct without the password, right? Now next step is open program.cs file, because over there we have to tell our service we want to use this connection. So remember our connection name in the app setting.json file is default connection. So in the program.cs file, after this option where you are creating the builder object, you have to tell what kind of SQL database connection you are using. If you are using a Postgres, you have to mention the Postgres over here also. If you are using the SQL Server, then you have to use the SQL Server property over here. Based upon that, whatever database you are using, you have to mention your connection string over here so that your service is aware of that, right? So next step is to create the products controller so that we can make a API call to retrieve the list of all the products. So click on controllers folder, go to add option, add controller, choose the API method. We will choose the API controller with empty option, give it a name. I will name it as products, and hit enter. It will create a API controller for you. Now just to save our time, let's get that snippet. Okay, so in this what we are doing is we will create a DB context object, and then we are injecting that into our products controller constructor and initiating it. Now we will expose one method, that is get, which will retrieve all the products that we have into our DB. Okay, now let's do one thing. We have our controller ready. Now we will simply run this application into the ISS Express mode, so that when it runs it will create the database for us. So let's click on run. At this point of time we don't have any database installed into our SQL Server, so let's quickly check that. Open SQL Server Management Studio. So our endpoint URL is API products. Let's wait for the SQL Server to be initiated. Okay, so here you go. Here is my local database. I am expanding it. Okay, I have it right now. I am deleting right now this database. Okay, I refresh it. Now I don't have any database. Okay, let's delete this. Okay, and rerun our code. Okay, here you go. Now you simply refresh this, you don't have it, right? Now I will call my API method API products, hit enter, and it will take a couple of seconds to generate it. Now you can see the response is coming up from the endpoint. Now if you just refresh your database, you will see a new database with online shop DB. It will be created, and if you just expand it, you will see one table in it, that is products. So this is the list of all the products that API is returning us right now. Okay, so the next step is to add the Docker Compose port in the Visual Studio. So do that, we have to right click on our project and go to the add option. Then you have to choose container orchestra port. Click on that. Here we have to choose the Docker Compose from the option. Click OK, and we will go for the Linux OS. And once you click that, it will click yes. It will create you a Docker Compose solution into your Visual Studio Solution Explorer, and over there you have a docker compose.yml file with you. So let's try to understand what this docker compose.yml file do for us. So before doing that, let's quickly copy paste our snippet. Okay, now let's try to understand what this docker compose file. It is basically a configuration file used by the Docker Compose. It serves as a blueprint for defining various components of our application. In our case, we are using two. One is the web API and second one is the SQL Server DB instance. So under the services section, basically you can see you can define your multiple containers, as we are using two. One is the SQL Server DB that I told you, another one is the web API, and another one we can define it. We can also define the networks, where you have your custom networks, that services that you want to connect it. And then you can also add the volumes, where you have to define the persistent storage for your container also. And you can also define the environment variables that is being used by the services, and also the dependencies. Like in this container we want a SQL server dependency, so we will first define our SQL Server container, and then to the next container we define its dependency we want it for this container, right? Now if I try to understand this, what we are doing under these sections, right? Firstly, we have to configure our SQL Server container for the Docker Compose file. So what we are doing over here is, firstly, we give it our container name. That is, in our case, it is the SQL Server container. You can give any custom name that you want. Then we are specifying an image to start the container where it should start. So I am using this online link. You can use also any SQL Server instance that available on this link. Okay, now next is the port number where you want to be exposed at SQL Server database ports, and next one is the environment, specifying the environment variable. Also it can be a dictionary or an array. Next thing is we have to prepare our web API container to use the Docker Compose. We give it a name. The only difference we have here is the Docker file. Specify the path of the Docker file that is being used to build this application. In our case, we are providing the path of the Docker file which is available to this project. And last one, the extra part is depends upon. So specifying the dependency between the multiple services, right? Services dependency instruct the Docker Compose to start the services in a dependency order. In our case, web API services depend upon the SQL Server DB. So Docker Compose will first start the SQL Server DB service before starting this web API services, so that we can consume our database. Now here you can specify your database name that you want to give it any name, and the another thing you want to change is you have to specify this SQL Server DB name into your appsetting.json file. Initially it is your local instance of the SQL Server that you have, right? Now it is a name of the container or services that you defined over here, SQL Server DB. Okay, same dependency, it should be same, otherwise it will not connect. Now let's run our Docker Compose application profile so that you can see when this composer will run in the Docker Compose file, you have your SQL Server ready. Now if you open this Docker Compose, right, and now you have two Docker under the Docker Compose file. If you expand that, you can see you have your web API SQL Server running, you have your SQL Server container running, and finally the web API container running, right? Now if you quickly want to connect your database, so simply go to it, click on connect. Now here I have specified localhost because it is running on the port 8002. I specify a user and the password that I mentioned into this file, Docker Compose file, the same password, and then I click on connect. You can see I am able to connect to it. Open the database section. Right now we don't have any database. Now let's hit our endpoint, API/products. Now it comes to our DB context file. It checks the database is there or not. So it is not there, it will first create it with the default data, and you will click continue. Now you can see a list is there, and if you simply open your database, now refresh it, you will see database will there into your database list. Expand the tables, you have the table also, right? You can do multiple things with the Docker file. This is very powerful tool. Now to conclude this lecture, in this tutorial we will run how to run our ASP.NET Core Web API against the SQL Server using the in the Linux container using the Docker Compose file. You can container to the spin up the multiple version of the SQL Server also without installing any of them on your local machine. This not only keep your development machine clean but also speed up the development with multiple databases and the development stacks. I hope you found this tutorial useful. The complete source code of this demo application will be available on the GitHub and link is in the description. If you have any comments or suggestion, please leave it in the comments below. Don't forget to share this tutorial with your friends or community, or please subscribe the channel if you haven't subscribed it. Thank you.